Good afternoon. If you're just tuning in, welcome to APAC's Legislative Leadership Summit. I'm Madeline Milka, President and CEO of APACS, the Asian Pacific American Institute for Congressional Studies. Thank you for joining us as we have a discussion on COVID and its economic impact. Before we get started, I want to remind everyone, please visit the exhibitor booths throughout this convention that we're having, this summit. There are sponsors who've been kind enough to be sure to participate on our panels, as well as to make sure that all of you have this opportunity to watch all of the wonderful speakers. And if you haven't done so yet, feel free to download our program book from the APEX website. I'd also like to thank our partner for this particular panel, AARP. And also, before we begin, it's my pleasure to introduce Congresswoman Young Kim for opening remarks. Congresswoman Kim currently represents California's 39th Congressional District. She's a member of the Small Business Committee, which examines the impact of general business practices and trends on small businesses. Let's give a warm welcome to Congresswoman Young Kim.
Hi, I'm Congresswoman Young Kim, representative for California's 39th District. That includes parts of Los Angeles, Orange, and San Bernardino counties in Southern California. Thank you for having me today. I'm so excited to be able to be here virtually with all of you during this Legislative Leadership Summit, as we have bipartisan policy discussions across industries and the political spectrum. I look forward to meeting each of you in person soon. This summit is also very timely, as I'm sure you all have felt personally, just like I have. Now more than ever, as we see bias and hate on the rise, targeting our AAPI community, we must be able to come together and put our partisan swords down and find ways to work together to get things done. Just as Asian Americans are Americans, issues impacting the AAPI community are American issues. As one of the first Korean American women to serve in Congress, I feel a duty to speak out in support of the AAPI community and educate my colleagues on both sides of the aisle on issues impacting us. A couple of weeks ago, I spoke at a congressional hearing to simply say that no group in our country is responsible for the COVID-19. We all saw over the past year that the COVID-19 pandemic did not discriminate. It hit communities across the country hard as we adjusted to lockdowns and other measures to protect our public health and safety. In California, 40,000 small businesses closed, and nearly half of those closures were permanent. As a small business owner, I understand that these are more than just statistics. These are men and women of all backgrounds working around the clock to keep their employees on payroll, earn a living, and support themselves and their families. I'm excited to be able to support our small business owners as a member of the House Small Business Committee in Congress, and also serving as ranking member of the Subcommittee on Innovation, Entrepreneurship, and Workforce Development. In order to recover our economy and support small businesses, we must not only help small business owners receive relief right now during COVID-19, but also provide ways for us to help entrepreneurs of all backgrounds access the capital they need to jumpstart their business, create jobs, and promote a strong workforce into the future. I also believe very strongly that the only way we'll get through this pandemic is by working together. That is why I'm proud to have worked on a few bipartisan initiatives already to support small business owners, such as extending the PPP deadline to May 31st, which President Biden signed into law, and 2 more efforts to improve SBA's 504 loan program to help small manufacturers, both of which passed the House too. So I will continue to work together with my colleagues on both sides of the aisle to support our small business and help us safely reopen our communities to get our economy back on track. Again, thank you for having me speak to all of you as you kick off this APAC's Legislative Leadership Summit. And I hope we can work together to promote ideas and issues impacting our community. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Congresswoman Kim, for joining us today. Now it's my pleasure to introduce Daphne Kwok, no longer, never really a stranger to AAPIs, the Vice President of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion for the Asian American and Pacific Audience Strategy, from a short message from AARP.
Hello, I'm Daphne Kwok, Vice President of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion for the Asian American Pacific Islander Audience for AARP. Caregivers. Are AAPIs caregivers? An AARP study found that the vast majority, 73% of AAPIs, more than any racial or ethnic group, believe that caring for parents is expected of them. But we don't associate with being caregivers. According to a nationwide AARP study, AAPIs are almost twice as likely to care for their elders than the general population, more likely to talk to doctors, contribute financially, and handle paperwork or bills than the total population of the same age or compared to whites, blacks, and Hispanics. One of the major legislative bills that AARP is currently supporting is a bipartisan Credit for Caring Act that would provide a new non-refundable federal tax credit of up to $5,000 annually for eligible working family caregivers, help address the financial challenges of caregiving, and help working family caregivers remain employed. AARP strongly supports this legislation and urges that it be enacted into law this year. Across party lines, the vast majority of individuals age 50 and older, 92%, support a federal tax credit for family caregivers. Family caregivers are the backbone of the U.S. care system, helping parents, spouses, and other loved ones live independently in their homes and providing about $470 billion annually in unpaid care to their loved ones. Family caregivers are an essential part of the care infrastructure, along with home and community-based services and the paid workforce. 78% of family caregivers are incurring out-of-pocket costs as a result of caregiving. Family caregivers are also spend on average nearly $7,000 or nearly 20% of their income in out-of-pocket care-related expenses annually. 45% of family caregivers have reported at least one adverse financial impact related to caregiving, including taking on more debt, leaving bills unpaid, and sacrificing current and future savings. COVID-19 has further exacerbated the financial challenges of caregiving. This cost is higher for long-distance caregivers. In 2016, the average out-of-pocket expenses for long-distance caregivers was $11,923. This legislation would help eligible family caregivers offset the cost of some caregiving expenses, such as a home care aide, adult daycare, home modifications, assistive technology, respite care, transportation, or other supports that help them and their loved ones. A joint AARP and National Alliance of Caregiving report found that most Asian caregivers are working salaried jobs while providing about 36.7 hours of caregiving a week. The same report found that AAPI caregivers also find their caregiving roles highly emotionally stressful, and a majority felt that they had no choice in taking on their caregiving responsibility. This tax credit would help eligible family caregivers caring for their loved ones of all ages, and unlike the Child Independent Care tax credit, would help family caregivers who care for non-dependents or who do not live with the person they are assisting. A recent AARP report examines how providing support to family caregivers age 50 plus to enable them to remain actively engaged in the workforce would affect the U.S. economy. If employed family caregivers age 50 plus have access to support in the workplace, U.S. GDP could grow by an additional $1.7 trillion or 5.5% in 2030. So please help us enact this bipartisan Credit for Caring Act to support all of our AAPI family caregivers. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Daphne and AARP, for all the good work that you do in looking out for our seniors. Next, I'd like to introduce our moderator, Kurt Bardella. Kurt has been a strategic communications advisor and media relations consultant for 16 years. He's worked with local, state, and federal government officials, as well as a broad array of private enterprises, trade associations, and national media corporations. He's advised politicians, CEOs, entertainers, and media figures during crisis situations. So do I basically call you the AAPI Olivia Pope? Maybe. I don't know.
Something
so
like
Kurt,
that.
it's all up to you to take this panel on its own. Thanks so much.
Well, thank you so much, and thanks to APACs for hosting this amazing panel, and for everyone who's watching and participating. There couldn't be a more important time for us to have conversations like this, and I'm so excited to introduce all of you to our great panelists, starting today with Alvina Yeh, Executive Director of the Asian Pacific American Labor Alliance. Alvina has such, I think, an amazing just story in terms of she's originally from Colorado, but comes from a Chinese family who fled from the war in Vietnam. She's been a lifelong community organizer, deeply passionate about the issues that we're going to be talking about today. So grateful to have you here with us. Anna Chu is the Vice President for Strategy and Policy for the National Women's Law Center, an entity that leads federal and state government relations strategy. She previously was the Vice President in Policy and Research at Center for American Progress Action Fund, otherwise known as CAP, leading its economic justice advocacy program. Spent time, like myself, on Capitol Hill, worked as a law clerk for former Chief Judge Jane Rastani, and attended the University of Southern California Law School, which makes you wonder how she ended up in a place like Washington, D.C., when she could have stayed out in beautiful Southern California. I say this as someone who grew up in San Diego. Also joining us is Chiling Tong, the Chief Executive Officer and President of the Asian Pacific Islander American Chamber of Commerce and Entrepreneurship, otherwise known as ACE. Chiling has an extensive domestic and international experience in economic and business development, with focus on enhancing the growth of small and minority business enterprises competing in the global market. She has more than 20 years of experience building strong nationwide network of 20 chapters consisting of entrepreneurs and community leaders. Just a very long and distinguished career in public service and advocacy. And finally, joining us as well is the Chief Executive Officer and Director for Pacific Island Knowledge to Action Resources, Susi Feltch. I'm going to butcher this, Malohifoʻou. Probably wasn't even close there, but I gave it a try. PICTAR, otherwise known as, focuses on empowered living, economic impact, preserving and perpetuating all Pacific Island cultures with dignity, hope, and self-efficacy. One thing I have in common with you is I, like you, am an adoptee, and I'm very fortunate to have the opportunities that I have had. You have an incredible life story as well that I hope we get a chance to dive into as this panel moves ahead. So thank you all so much for being here, for being part of this conversation. It's an honor to share this stage with you. Alvina, I'm going to start with you. And, we're going through a pretty unique moment in time. I think that this is really the first time in my adult life where any issues related to the AAPI community are actually front and center, part of a national dialogue and conversation. We're seeing interaction at the highest level of government from the Biden administration, leaders in Congress, amazing advocates on Capitol Hill like Senators Hirono and Tammy Duckworth, members in the House like Ted Lieu, Judy Chu, Grace Ming, Andy Kim. I'm wondering, as we set the stage for this overarching conversation, how has this broader national conversation that's unfolding impacted you?
I think it's a really exciting time for our community in many ways, just because the conversation is more widespread. Unfortunately, it is at the heels of our community just undergoing so much over the past, year and a half. At APALA, we've really been focused heavily on how we can advocate for workers, especially the 2 million Asian American and Pacific Islanders that are classified as essential workers. Folks that are working in healthcare and transportation and service industries, and on top of that, millions more have suffered loss of wages, right, as entire industries have been completely decimated by COVID. That's not to mention the disproportionate impact that COVID has had on immigrant and communities of color. One stat that I've been thinking about a lot this year is that the National Nurses United did a survey and saw that while only 4% of U.S. nurses are Filipino, they accounted for about 30% of nurse deaths related to COVID-19, right? And so I think about how even on the front lines, our communities are really suffering, not to mention that Southeast Asian and Pacific Islander communities are dealing with particularly disproportionate health disparities around this pandemic. And then, on a personal level, I think a lot about what's been written about how the general impact of this pandemic on working women, and how many people like me and I do happen to be more privileged, right, to have this job and to be able to do the work that I do. But just the impact that this pandemic is going to have on women for generations to come, I think, cannot be overlooked.
Yeah, that's certainly something we're going to be talking, I think, a lot about during this entire panel. I want to ask Anna, just the depth of your experience in public policy, working on Capitol Hill for so long. What do you think has been the COVID-19 pandemic's effect specifically on the AAPI community and how it's pushed our community further into poverty? I think a lot of people don't realize, and this is kind of what happens with that model minority myth, but there is a major economic impact and income gap in the Asian American Pacific Islander community. And I think that my observation has been that COVID has played a significant role in widening that gap. What's your observation about it all?
Thank you, Kurt, for raising this, and thank you, Alvina, also, for speaking to this. The COVID-19 pandemic has absolutely disproportionately impacted our community and our people, and it's hard to see that, I think, when you look at the overall numbers for our community, because of the fact that a lot of figures and a lot of data we have is not disaggregated. And we know that certain segments of our community are faring far worse, than others. I also want to lift up in particular what's happening to AAPI women. And so what we know is that women, AAPI women, especially, have oftentimes borne a lot of labor in our communities and in our families that are unpaid. And so I think Daphne mentioned caretaking a lot, and that's true. The care workforce, whether it be caregivers for the elders or caregivers for our children, are overwhelmingly comprised of women and women of color, including AAPI women. And so what happened with this pandemic is we really saw that workforce being pushed to the brink. And so what happened is then you had women who may have been fortunate enough to keep their jobs, but have to somehow figure out caregiving in the middle of that. And the stressors actually pushed a lot of women out of the workforce. So nearly 2 million women have left the workforce since the start of the pandemic. We have lost literally decades and decades and decades of gains for women. And these figures, replicate, you find them in the AAPI community too. And what's particularly, I think, troubling to me is some of the long-term unemployment numbers. So last month, of the Asian women who were unemployed, 45% had been unemployed for more than 6 months. And so we have a lot more that we need to do in these months ahead to make sure our entire community can recover, but not just recover. How can we set ourselves up to once again to thrive, so that we're not replicating the issues of the past, so that we don't have another pandemic or recession, and then all of a sudden you see millions and millions of people out of the workforce. We need to fix a lot of the structural issues that are impacting our community.
Right, Anna. And, and I think one of the things we always see when disaster strikes of any kind, whether it's a pandemic, a natural disaster, it's always the communities that are already having major challenges that get impacted even harder than everybody else. I think that's probably something that's happened during the COVID-19 pandemic for our community and for especially for women. Sorry, I didn't know if you wanted to add anything to that, Anna, but I'll go to Chiling, because one of the things that I'm interested in, and this is really relying on your breadth of experience working within the government, especially at the federal level, time at the Commerce Department. How can government actually be an instrument of good in helping these communities come back? And again, not just get back to level, but actually, be set up to succeed.
Well, absolutely, Kurt. Thank you so much, for your question, and also thank you so much for your commitment to support the AAPI business community. There's a lot of things that government can do, but I just want to give you the state of AAPI business community right now, because the impact of COVID-19 has a devastating impact on the AAPI small business community. National ACE, along with U.S. Black Chamber, U.S. Hispanic Chamber, commissioned the largest national survey with a focus on Black, Hispanic, and AAPI business. Actually, we're conducting another one right now. And according to our funding, 84% of AAPI small business owners reported that COVID-19 has had a negative impact on their business. So, and the 60% did not apply for any federal relief because they did not think they were eligible for any relief. For government work, National ACE, we represent 2.2 million AAPI business owners employed by 3.5 million people. So during the last year, we have received a CARE Act, which because of government's funding, they have provide funding to the Minority Business Development Agency, and then they give it to different chamber like U.S. Hispanic Chamber, U.S. Black Chamber, and also National ACE, to ask them to do the work like a technical assistance program to help small business to grow and in cope of COVID-19. And also, right now, SBA, they just issue a restaurant revitalization fund, and then all the restaurants, they will be able to apply. If you talk a different funding, I think American government has been doing their best for like a PPP. Unfortunately, the second round of PPP has been exhausted. So we have been talking with lawmakers. Like yesterday, we had a coffee policy discussion with Senator Ben Cardin. Senator Ben Cardin is the chair of a small business and entrepreneurship committee. So we have been asking, the PPP has been exhausted. How can we have do we have another round of PPP? And now for restaurant, all the Chinese American restaurants are struggling, and also Asian restaurants are struggling. Like one of the restaurant owner, we had a conversation with him yesterday, and he said he lost almost all his business. And another American store next to him, they are fully packed. So he doesn't understand why people do not come to a Chinese restaurant, because they are afraid of virus or some other element. He does not know. So right now, SBA, restaurant revitalization fund is very, very helpful. So I really wish your restaurant, you can apply for that.
Yeah, definitely. Susi, you actually have kind of sat at this intersection of, private enterprise, small business, nonprofits. I'm curious, we've heard kind of the government perspective and the think tank public policy side of this, but sitting from your vantage point and looking at the intersection of all of that, what does the path back look like for small businesses? For we know the big corporations are always going to be okay, but what does it look like for the little guy? Susi, I think we're having a little audio issue right now, so we couldn't quite hear your answer there.
Can you hear me now?
There we go. Let's try that again.
Oh, sorry about that. Thank you so much for the opportunity to be here. I would say for Pacific Islanders in any community here in the United States, we have been #1 and #2 in deaths in the communities. And when you're talking about funeral costs, on top of all of the other things, the mental health issues behind deaths and money issues has been an issue for our business owners. I think the other thing that's come out of this is the use of community health workers, because we have two programs that one is social services, where we provide direct service, and we have our Pacific Island Business Alliance that has 3 chapters, we've been able to merge and use our ecosystem. And I find that having those conversations with government agencies to say, great about the PPP, and we love all of these opportunities, but if you don't have the tools to apply to get those, so why are we asking the people with the least capacity, with the least time, with the least money to go out and hire bookkeepers to get their books in a place where they can apply? I'm saying to government, please, you brunt that cost. You get an army of bookkeepers, and I can raise the usage of all of these grants that you're giving us 20, 30% if you give us the right tools. And so it's wonderful that government provides this, but the technical assistance for our community businesses has got to be there, or we will never, ever get out of this.
Yeah, very true. Chiling, again, I feel like you're our government expert, again, having been Deputy Assistant Secretary at Commerce. How can we get that message to the bureaucracy to provide that level of support?
Yes, Kurt, thank you. And Susi, again, I applaud your support for the AAPI community. Kurt, actually, I have to, because for AAPI business community, we're dealing with 2 illness. One is COVID, another is racism, hate, and violence. I have to say, I applaud President Biden's memorandum on combating racism, also intolerance against AAPI. But it is also very critical for local government to be consistent and adopt this memorandum across the country for all minority groups that are discriminated against on regular basis. And Asian American entrepreneurs, I think they really need to also work with, law enforcement authority are not paying attention enough for them for racism, hate, and violence part. A lot of the Asian American and Asian business owner, they are very afraid to deal with law enforcement. And I think we have so many webinars for the past year. We have 120 webinars, including to teach them how to work with FBI, how to work with Department of Justice, because they are dealing with so many different issues right now. There's more than probably 3,800 incidents against the AAPI, and I tell you, almost 40% of them happen in the work of business place. So they have to deal with COVID, also they have to deal with racism, hate, and violence. So I think it's very important for small, medium-sized business community staying connect with each other, and like a local business owner, and also make friends with a local law enforcement, create a network of support.
Yeah, no, that's exactly what we need. Alvina, I think about just the environment that workers find themselves in right now. And I'm wondering if you think that the outward display of racism and xenophobia, is creating a negative impact for our AAPI workers, just the folks, going to work, doing their job, trying to do their job, trying to get work. What is the impact of the almost 300% rise in hate crimes we've experienced over the last year?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, for essential workers this past year, not only are they dealing with dangers of going physically into work during a pandemic, but on top of that, as you mentioned, are facing increased racism on the job. We've heard reports of workers, being spit on, or, hospital workers having, patients ask for a different non-Asian worker, right? Yeah. And I know that NAPOF recently did a survey where, 50% of Asian American, 50% of Pacific Islander women said that they experienced some kind of racist incident in the past 2 years. And I think that stat, including gender, is important because, we talk about the Atlanta shooting. Many of those women were aunties and, immigrant women who were facing immense barriers to finding work and to supporting their families. And they were in an industry with very few worker protections and oversight, right? So many people have been talking about the racism of that shooting, but the shootings are also this intersection of race and gender and immigration status and work. And I believe that it's sort of this intersection of like misogyny and white supremacy that empowered the violence, but also sort of institutional racism and sexism where, policymakers exclude workers from certain protections and in industries that are disproportionately represented by women and immigrants. And I want to touch on something Anna brought up about, people who are doing care work. And in many cases, women do that work for free. But even for people who are domestic workers or in the care industry, that's another industry that lacks basic protections and rights, right? And of those states, and there are only 3 that offer any kind of protection. Some of those laws are like, okay, you can have 1 day off for every 7 days that you work, or maybe you can have 3 paid vacation days a year, right? And as an aside, these are industries that were excluded from the National Labor Relations Act because they were industries like agriculture and domestic workers who were employed by people who were formerly slaves. But I bring all this up because a lot of this sort of like hatred and violence in the workplace isn't new. We've seen, even from, the 1882 Chinese Exclusion Act, we had labor leaders that were advocating for the Chinese Exclusion Act, right? Talking about the dangers of Asiatic men because they were worried about what that would do to union jobs in the US. We think about Vincent Chin, who's, this year's like the 39th anniversary of his death, who died at the hands of auto workers because they were mad about the perception of Japanese automakers impacting their industry, right? And even, this past year, we've seen sort of this like Cold War rhetoric from both sides of the aisle that really talk about China as the enemy or China as a competition. And all of that works to further exacerbate xenophobia and fear of Asian Americans in our country. And I also just want to note sort of, for Pacific Islanders, the racism and the dehumanization of Pacific Islander communities that have led to colonization and commodification of their island homes. So all of this is definitely connected and has definitely had an impact on our communities this past year. Yeah, I mean,
I think so many people in this country are so ignorant of our history. And, one of the things that I often say, when I'm on, an MSNBC, it's like, racism towards our community isn't new. It's been there for the entire time that this country has existed. And we've had such important conversations about our law enforcement and our court systems. And I bring up, that the Vincent Chin situation where that was a classic example of the law enforcement criminal justice system failing us in about the worst way imaginable. And so many people I've talked to, including many in the Black community, that's the first that they had heard of that. I think that this has been an important moment in time for us to collectively educate and inform other people about the hardships and challenges that we've faced over time. And I wanted to ask you, and kind of, piggybacking a little bit here on what Alvina was talking about, just from a pure legal standpoint, what are the types of reforms that we should be fighting for? And I think about how the majority of hate crimes go unreported. How, particularly, I think it's something along the lines of, 67% of the hate crimes that have been reported have been from women. What should we be fighting for in changing and updating and evolving the existing laws that are currently on the books?
Thank you, Kurt. I may disappoint you because I am not an expert on hate crimes law. And so I won't be able to give you the detailed nuance of like which laws to update. But that said, I have worked, with different AAPI organizations, and I do deeply believe in the push to increase resources for those communities and groups most impacted. So while there is, an enforcement aspect that lots of people with more experience than I, are looking into and examining, I think equally important to that is, how are we helping survivors and how are we strengthening communities on the ground? And by that, I mean, what about the organizations and the groups on the ground working to improve mental health services? We know that in this pandemic, lots of our communities have been facing quite some strains and quite some mental health strains that we don't talk about. And so where are the resources there? We also know that when we talk about API women and hate, what about the violence that we may see at home? We know that domestic violence has increased in this time when everybody has been stuck inside and there is no escape. There is no going to work. There is no removing yourself away. And so where are, the resources that we can invest, to help meet these challenges? And so I do think that there are issues, around, how to stem, anti-API hate. And we definitely need to take that head on. But I would love us to look holistically at what are the resources that our communities, on the ground facing these issues are saying they need. And so I wanted to lift up the ask, for frankly, the mental health services, the community, engagement and the other outreach that aren't getting enough attention.
I'd like to just jump in here. If I can jump in here. So one of the issues that I have seen from the Pacific Island perspective is what this has done is our community is saying, why are we with AAs? Not understanding, because so many of our Pacific Islanders have the features of Asians. And so when those hate crimes are affecting Pacific Islanders, they're coming to me saying, why was this person saying this to me? And I'm having to have this conversation is, there's ignorant people that live among us. And when you're a Pacific Islander and may have some facial features or body features that look Asian and people are saying things to you, but you don't see yourself, and you see yourself as a Pacific Islander and not an Asian, and understanding, seeing all of this, no hate AAPI, then Pacific Islanders saying, you hate me? Well, I hate you then. Why are you, and so this has caused us to really evaluate, why are we with AAPI? Why did the federal government do this? How do we advocate if we don't want to do this? And I have appreciated the relationships that I have had with, I call you guys my big brothers and big sisters that I'm learning from and being mentored by, because you are generations ahead of us. But this is a conversation from Pacific Islanders saying, how did this happen? Why are we with AA? And this has brought to visibility these types of conversations. That has been a very interesting conversation from our perspective. And I think the other thing about mental health, because we do have a social service program providing, I'm really proud that we didn't skip a beat from our in-person support groups to our online. And so we have learned that support groups, peer support groups, are the half step to therapy. Our communities don't want to go to therapy, don't like the word, but we have found that that half step is going with a friend to a support group to get resources. And then we can lead people to culturally relevant services, because to come out of the gate saying you need to go to therapy, you need to go to this group, it doesn't work. And so that's been our experience being on the ground, that has been effective. Our rates have been higher in domestic violence. We have case managed more and more people that are in shelters. And so I believe that mental health services can help across the board is something that we should really look at. So I echo your comments there, Anna.
Well, and that's a great message. I think we're in Mental Health Awareness Month actually right now.
Yes.
And so that is such an important component. I mean, I think everybody has a better appreciation for mental health, having emerged from this COVID winter that we've been in. I know I certainly have. No, but all of this has also, I think, raised important conversations about identity and race. I think that every single one of us can identify with what it's like to be asked the question, where are you from? And of course, when I get asked that, I always say, I'm from Southern California. Well, where are you really from? Like, what the hell are you talking about? Like, I make it as painful as possible for them to get to what they're trying to get at, which ultimately avails itself when they say, well, where are your parents from? I'm curious, how have each of you dealt with that question? I had a great conversation with Congressman Andy Kim recently about this. And he was relaying a story about how he was trying to navigate these conversations with his 5-year-old boy who at school was being made fun of for his physical features. He came home, didn't understand why that would be. And I think that all of us have been touched by that in some way. So, I'm just curious, and we'll leave it. We'll start with you, Susie. Just like, how do you deal with that question?
I try to break it down to our human race, commonality, and I say I'm from heaven, the same place you are.
I love that.
And leave it there, right? Because
that's great.
That takes us to we are part of the human race, and so that's how I deal with it. Because I got tired. I felt like it's my story if I feel like telling you.
Right. Why is it that every time we meet somebody, we have to give a 1-minute version of our entire autobiography?
Correct. and why? And so I just came up with that idea years ago of just saying, I'm from heaven, the same place you are.
That is the first time I've heard that answer. I love that. That's great. Chiling, how do you deal with it?
Well, I think, Kurt, thank you so much. Especially, I think this segment is so important because we can discuss all different kind of issues. I live in Potomac, Maryland right now. People ask, where are you from? I'm from California originally. And then they say, before that, where did you come from? Yes, Monterey Park, Sacramento, all my places, I just tell them, where I have been, visiting or lived over there.
How about you, Anna?
I want to have a short conversation. I don't really want to get into it. So I go straight to the point. San Francisco, born and raised, and I'm Chinese American. Enough. Let's move on.
I hate the fact, though, that we have to do that. And that's why I came up with that answer, because I got really, really tired of hearing, were you born here in America? Where were you born? That's my story to tell. And I came up with this idea that I'm from heaven just like you are, so I could avoid that and I could share my parts of my life with who I choose to. Because otherwise, we feel obligated. And we shouldn't feel that way at all.
Sure. Alvina, how do you answer that question?
I mean, Susie's answer is definitely the best, but usually I just, like you, Kurt, I make it a little bit hard on folks. I say I'm from Colorado. No, really, and depending on the mood I am, I might indulge folks, but I'm gonna try the heaven thing, Susie.
It's so, you're right. It's so contingent on whatever mood I'm particularly in on that given moment. Like sometimes I'm feeling friendly, and so I'll be a little bit more gracious. Other times I'm in a bad mood and I will be a total jerk about it. But I like the heaven thing. That I've never heard that before. That's such a great answer. I'm gonna have to test drive that and see how that goes and what reaction that gets. One of the things I think, one of the inadvertent but positive byproducts of this entire situation that we find ourselves in is, I think there has been more coming together of our community. I feel like there has been, a more pronounced community effort to be visible, to lift one another up. One of the things that I've always observed that's made the Black community so effective, particularly in this time of Black Lives Matter, is how great at mobilizing and coalescing they are. And I feel like their advocacy is something that we can certainly take best practices from and apply to everything that we're trying to fight for. And so, Alvina, I'm curious, how have you seen, other AAPI, whether it's businesses, groups, individuals, lift one another up during this period of time?
Yeah, I mean, I think if we're talking about businesses, and I don't represent the business perspective, but I've definitely seen a lot online that's been really organic in terms of how people have been organizing. And I have to say, I've been really inspired by younger millennials and Gen Z folks who are really putting out some great content about, just on Instagram, like slides educating people about just our community and our history and ways that we can support each other. And I've seen a lot of that get a lot of traction online. There's been like auctions through Instagram where it's highlighted different AAPI businesses. I've seen restaurants donate some of their proceeds to the community. But one thing that I think in particular, especially because you brought up the Black Lives Matter movement, is thinking about how we as a community can continue to stand in solidarity with other communities of color, just because so many of us are going through very similar things. And right now, when we have a little bit of a spotlight on our community, I think it's important to use that to be able to talk about policy solutions that work and uplift all of our communities. And that's one thing that I want to make sure that we name in this moment, especially as we think about things like hate crime legislation, which is not universally something that is supported by all communities of color, especially as Black and brown folks are targeted more by our criminal justice system. So yeah, one thing I want to name.
Yeah, that's a good point. Social media has certainly been a very powerful proponent for all communities of color at this point. But I can't tell you how many times on Instagram I'll see an infographic or this Stop Asian Hate. It's been heartening to see that. I should tell everyone too who's here and watching. Please feel free to post a question. In the Q&A platform, we'll be going to audience questions coming up here soon, and love to hear what questions you have for our amazing panel. It would be yeah.
I was wondering if I can actually take a moment to share a story.
Please.
What your question to me brought up a story. Your question brought up a story to me about the solidarity that I saw from other communities, in the aftermath of the Atlanta shootings. So in the aftermath of the Atlanta shootings, obviously, like many others, I was very, very distressed. The combination of white supremacy and misogyny and the impact that it had on our community was just something that struck me a lot. And so on our weekly gender justice women's community leaders call, we gave basically like a forum for Sung-Young Chamorro, who's the executive director for the National Asian Pacific American Women's Forum, to talk about the moment and what she saw and how she felt, about just seeing months and months of anti-AAPI hate, culminate in an act of violence like this, but also seeing how the shooter targeted AAPI women because of the hypersexualization of AAPI women. And so it was a moment when she just, shared herself and shared what she was going through and how the moment hit her. And then after that, like one after one, like women of color leaders, Black women, brown women from across our community, spoke up and spoke out in solidarity, and shared their comfort, shared their understanding. And it made me feel hopeful that we had, that so many people like from outside of our community was also having our backs, and supporting us and giving us that moment. And it's made me very optimistic that together, we can have the solidarity for each other, and that we can actually start turning the tides on these issues.
No, that's and it makes me think of something that my friend and colleague, the great Reverend Al Sharpton, said on a panel that I was on with him, and he said, we can't fight hate everywhere if we don't call out hate, every time we see it. And I have been heartened by the support that I have seen from the African American community, from the Latino community. From, so many people have reached out to me and have asked the question that I'll ask all of you, which is, what can I do? What can I do? More than just posting a graphic on social media. What would you tell someone who and I'll stay with you here, Anna, who asks, how can I help?
I think the first thing is listen, right? Listen to the stories, listen to, what we've gone through, and take a moment to learn the history as well. So that a story like Alvina said about Vincent Chan isn't new, but instead, like, these are our shared stories. We are that many communities of color face, and that we are all in together. And so it is not that we are a separate model minority that's over there, and that we don't face, we don't face similar issues or similar frustrations. So that's where I would go. Like, listen to our stories, and take a little bit of time to learn our history too.
Yeah. Alvina, what's your answer to the question, how can I help?
I think a lot of it can start with personal education. This past year, I've been thinking a lot about my daily journey to become a little bit less racist. But there's a great newsletter called Anti-Racism Daily that I've been reading, and it's really broken down a lot of topics, really opened my mind to things like the concept of abolition and why that's important for our community. So I would start there, and then, a short plug for a couple of things that APALA is working on. Last year, we started curating a toolkit on fighting anti-Asian racism that has so many great resources from folks all around the community. And this year, actually yesterday, we launched a new toolkit specifically designed for labor folks, unions and state feds and worker centers to think about how we can protect Asian American Pacific Islander workers. And there's also really specific things like bargaining language for racial justice and things like that. So, those are some things I would offer up.
Chiling.
Kurt, thank you. I want to share, after Atlanta shooting, we immediately get all 70 affiliate AAPI chamber and partner to share with their story. And here is a story from a leader from Chinatown in New York. This is what he said. A couple weeks ago, I came within 2 feet, within an 8-inch knife. Instead, it went into the back of a poor Asian man who's about to get married. He lost his kidney. He lost a part of his liver. He's still in the hospital. The next day, someone pepper sprayed someone on my street. The same night, the Asian man was punched on the subway. So I think this is the time we really need to be united. And we are so grateful we are able to work with U.S. Black Chamber, U.S. Hispanic Chamber, to stand in solidarity. We just had our Asian Heritage Month. We had a panel discussion with them. And also we are going to do that with another Asian business organization in New York. We want to let people know there are so many things we can do together. The goal is not to make anyone feel alone in the fight. Staying silent will not solve problems, only normalize them. We know that these attacks must stop, and we need to unite as a country to end this discrimination and bias. State, I think we want to make sure that AAPI community really need help, because people think AAPI community is a minority, model minority, which is not true. There's we really need a system, all kind of different assistance. We have so many poor community within us, like among, community and other community, they really need help. So we really want to let people know how we can, that the AAPI business community has been excluded from many of the diversity, equality, and inclusion initiative that have been undertaken in the past years. So I think this is a really a good time for us to move from advocacy to movement, and also the real action, how people can support each other.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. I couldn't agree more. Susi, how can people who want to be involved get involved? What should they be doing?
I always say, get to know us, get to know, give up your time, roll up your sleeves, come and build relationships within our communities so you can see past our physical appearance and our culture and heritage. I have this conversation about our communities are interconnected, and one community is hurt, we all hurt. Because if you're ignorant and look the other way, the next time it will be your particular community. And if we don't stand together and work together, it could be your community next that's going to be focused. And I think you saw Black Lives Matter and people not understanding that. And then you see what happens to the Asian Pacific Island community is I think that if anything, it's been a good example to show that the Black Lives Matters, their houses were burning down, right? We weren't saying that all of our other houses, we weren't burning down, but we needed to all give water and help them put out the fire. The next month, then it becomes the Asian homes were starting to burn down, right? And so we have an obligation and a responsibility to all community, whoever's house is burning down. We need to be there. And it wasn't about one is better than the other. It was just that one community's houses were burning down and we needed to step in. And that idea that we are all interconnected is an example that we have been trying to educate our community about, is that right now our houses are burning down. And we need the help. The Latinx community is coming to help. The Black Lives Matter groups have been coming in to help. That we have a responsibility and an obligation to help each other.
Yeah, definitely. Anna, you were the policy director at the Democratic Senatorial Campaign Committee, the DSCC. So I feel okay putting a little more political question to you. One of the things that I have said, so I'll take a little bit here. I have made it very clear that I believe that there is a direct correlation between the rise in hate crimes targeting our community and the charged political rhetoric that has come from the Republican Party, specifically Donald Trump, particularly during the COVID-19 beginnings, referring to it routinely as the China virus, using terms like Kung flu. How much do you think the politics, the political environment that we're in has contributed to the environment we find ourselves in, being under siege as a community?
I think it's definitely a contributing factor. I mean, there's no denying actually what the data shows. The minute he starts saying China flu, China virus, we saw an uptake in reports of anti-AAPI hate. And, words matter, and the examples that our leaders set matter. So if we have someone at the top saying that, and then it makes it okay for everyone else to repeat it. And then when it gets to our children, it makes it okay for our children to start calling each other names and to start acting in that way. And so I don't think it's even controversial, or is it a political question? But if you use that kind of language and spread that kind of sentiment and hate, it will increase and you'll see a corresponding impact. So I think I'm grateful that that it's been dialed down a little bit, because there's been a change in leadership that does not say things like China flu. I'm grateful for that.
Yeah, definitely. One of the questions we got from our audience here, and I'll start with you, Alvina. What are some of your respective organization strategies to prepare and potentially protect the Asian American community as these incidents are occurring?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's so hard because a lot of this violence is interpersonal, right? And I think, because we are a national organization, I think there's an opportunity for us to talk about the root causes of violence. And, yes, there's the rhetoric, and yes, there's, this sort of personal element. There's also, I think, in this pandemic, a greater sense of desperation, and all the ways that we've seen our community have fault lines around access to jobs and wages and housing and health, and the ways that has caused some desperation, particularly in urban settings. And I think we should be talking about how we can pass policy solutions so that all our communities can thrive. I think we should also be having community conversations about what it means to define and redefine safety and how we can keep each other safe as a community. We've talked a lot about solidarity on this call already today, and I think it's a great opportunity to continue the conversation about things like community ambassador programs, transformative justice programs, mental health resources, all the kinds of wraparound services that make communities feel whole and feel abundant and feel safe.
Yeah. One of the other questions, this one's for you, Chiling. What are some of the economic issues that you've heard from your constituencies that they are facing?
Oh, absolutely, Kurt. This is a very critical issues. For Asian business community, they are facing a couple challenges: access to capital, access to technology, and also access to education. And right now, they also, facing language barriers and also now safety issues. So for us, the National ACE, we have instituted a campaign called AAPI Strong to address the emotional and physical distress caused by the attacks and discrimination against the AAPI small business. So this program is not a moment, but it's a movement. We want our impact to be sustainable and long term. So we are doing two things. We provide technical assistance for capacity building in response to COVID, but also we have AAPI Strong to deal with anti-AAPI hate and bias. And also we plan a roundtable discussion series with elected official, policymaker, and AAPI business owner to provide a full understanding of the severe damage is act of anti-AAPI bias that have had on the business leaders. So about 3 weeks ago, we called our 70 affiliate AAPI chamber to meet with White House Senior Advisor Richmond to talk about the important issue. So for any AAPI business community, we love them have to check our website, nationalace.org, and also acesmallbusiness.org. You will be able to see our survey. You will be able to see the service we offer to you.
Definitely. Susi.
I'd like to, I was just going to say, let me jump in here, is actually the digital divide too has been an issue. We are trying to move businesses to learn how to use the internet. And in the time that you have these grants coming out, people say, oh, well, send your business owners to an accounting class. I said, that's a long-term solution to a very long-term problem. We need short-term solutions. I mean, we are giving out free laptops, trying to help people get connected with free internet services and moving businesses to learn and be creative in how do they move their business online. And we're talking to people that don't know where the on button is. How do we do that work in the time that a grant is open and closed within a couple of months? What we've done is engaged our community health workers that have traditionally been in the medical field over to the business sector now. So we pair businesses up with our ambassadors and ask the owner the question, we fill in the form, help them get that. But I am now pushing back with our officials saying, why is the responsibility on our shoulders? Yeah. We have the least money, least time, least everything right now. Yeah, and so share the burden with us.
Right, Susi, I really appreciate that. Susi and I, we have a constantly talking with each other, especially Susi brought my attention that the SBA, they have a great 7J program and they maybe, have the budget problem, but we're going to discuss with SBA, the advocate, like a Susi and the other chamber president, they have played very, very significant roles. So I encourage all the business owner, go to Susi's website, go to all the local Asian chambers website and to register, and you will be able to learn a lot of resources from there.
Can I jump in here too? This is not on the business piece, but one thing that was brought up is just the lack of culturally competent in-language resources that are out there. You know, APALA has members and chapters all across the country, and a lot of our chapters have been focused right now on vaccine equity and vaccine outreach, because a lot of the language materials have been maybe in Spanish in addition to English, and so many of our monolingual workers have not, you know, had that kind of information in the languages that they speak. So we've been spending a lot of time doing some translations, driving people to vaccine sites, and you know, the other thing I would kind of throw on there as we're talking about policy solutions is data disaggregation, which Anna mentioned before, is making sure that all of our, you know, state, local, federal agencies are collecting data about all of our communities, you know, by all of our ethnicities, the languages that they speak, and by gender, so that we can tell a fuller picture of the needs that our community has.
Yeah, no, that's
if I can jump in there, Kurt, sorry.
Yeah, please. I love it.
You're trying to moderate, and we're like, wait. We want to go inside.
It makes my job easier. Jump on in.
So I just want to point out that actually the White House OMB Office for Management and Budget issued a request for information actually last week, basically asking, you know, what can the government do better in terms of its equity to help achieve equity? So what type of data can it collect better? How does it spend its resources? Who who the contractors are? And so there's a lots of opportunity there, I think, to ensure that the government can work better for our community. You know, for instance, you know, they're seeking information on disaggregated data. So which pieces should they look at first? You know, which pieces are really important, like what and how? Like, and so I think there's a lot of opportunity for us, you know, to say we need data in this way, like for these communities, how it should be separated out, like to guide them in that process. And I think like that's, you know, really important for a lot of us to engage because, well, yeah, the decision starts with the data. And if you don't have that, you're not going to make the right decisions.
Yeah, that's very true. I mean, I think that we've seen one of the key components of the hate crimes legislation passed by the Senate recently had to do with how we have the resources to better report data, how to make it more accessible to people who speak different languages to be a part of that. You know, we can't solve the problem unless we're able to adequately diagnose it. And so I think that's such a big component of it. You know, as we kind of wind down our time here, I'd like to ask each of you, one, if there's something that you want to tell us about your organization specifically that you haven't already mentioned that you want people to know about, please do that. And two, one of the final questions that we got from our audience, I love this question, which is, you know, what is an information resource for you that you would encourage other people to you know, digest, whether it's a book, a reporter you like, a newsletter you're reading, just something that people who want to get involved, who want to be more aware, who want to understand our history better, what's a go-to for them? And I'll start with, you know, Alvina, I'll start with you to kick us off and then wrap this thing up.
Oh man, I was hoping you'd go to me last because I was trying to rack my brain. Well, I did mention the Anti-Asian Racism newsletter, which I do read every day, and there's so many things that come in my inbox. So I would mention that one.
Anna?
I'm going to just take liberty to mention one piece that I didn't get to mention. You know, we talked a lot, we're doing a lot of work around the structural issues that will help women, like women of color, get back to work and get back to thriving. And so one of the pieces, honestly, about why AAPI women have been forced out of the workplace and why, you know, 16.5% of those Asian women working part-time jobs actually want full-time jobs instead is the lack of care, right? Because we're not going to get people back unless we've got the care situation worked out. And so one of the things we're focused on right now is to push for a massive investment in our care infrastructure. And I say care infrastructure because, again, that means like caregiving workers. That means our childcare industries. That means thinking through like how we take care of our elders. It means paid leave, paid family leave, sick leave. And so I invite you all to, you know, check out the National Women's Law Center. We're doing a lot of work around this. But we need investments in the care infrastructure if any of our communities are going to get back.
Yeah. Chiling?
Yes, National AIDS was the only national Asian chamber received a CARE Act grant from the U.S. Department of Commerce Minority Business Development Agency to create a small business recovery resource center, which provides small business technical assistance and capacity building support to AAPI and MBEs in response to COVID-19. And another one is our AAPI Strong campaign to address the emotional, physical distress caused by the attack and discrimination against AAPI small business. Also, we have our data sharing program. We'll share with a community about the survey. We're going to work with AAPI community in response both COVID and anti-AAPI hate. Please check our website, nationalaids.org or acesmallbusiness.org.
That's great. Susie?
And our website is www.pik2ar.org. And you can always email me at Susi, SUSI, at pik2ar.org. We will have a resource for you. Our commitment is to anyone that reaches out that you will get 2 resources from us in social services or business resources. I feel like each one of it is an interpersonal issue about bias. And I always share with people, know your own bias. Figure that out first. And once you figure that out, then you can go outside of yourself. But it is about our own interpersonal ideas that I always share. Figure yourself out. Look at yourself in the mirror before you go outside.
Very wise advice. Alvina, I think you have something you wanted to mention.
Yeah, forgot to plug my own website. So apalanet.org. You'll find information about our upcoming APALA convention that's coming up in August 6th through 8th. Anyone can come and join and hear all about the great work that we're doing. We're going to be featuring a lot of really important stories from essential workers, about global solidarity from workers across the seas. On our website, we also have a report if you just want to hear more about AAPI workers and who we are. It's our Untapped Power report. And then lastly, this is really important. Folks have mentioned millions of workers are still really suffering from unemployment and the impacts of COVID. And we've got a COVID-19 fund that we're fundraising for actively right now. The link for that is bit.ly/giveinmayapala. And I hope that folks can donate because we really want to make sure we get payments out to folks that are still heavily impacted by the impacts of COVID.
Absolutely, and I'll add to one resource, one news entity that I've really become a big fan of is something called the AAPI. Great content about Asian American politics and activism. Something that I discovered in the wake of Georgia. And kind of the realization that some of the best reporting that's being done wasn't the national news networks, wasn't the Washington Post. It was the Asian American centric ones that really had the best insights and really got to the heart of how our community was feeling and all that. So kind of the more you know, as they say. I want to thank our panelists, Alvina, Anna, Chiling, and Susi, for taking this time to have this great conversation. Learned a lot. I hope everybody watching enjoyed it. I hope they all take the time to check out your organizations, follow you guys on social media, be a part of this growing conversation. This concludes our panel on the economic impacts of COVID-19. We're now going to take a 30-minute break before our next panel. So thank you all for watching.
Thank you.